Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the poker vlog. Right now we are at the Mirage, and I know what you're thinking. There is no poker at the Mirage. And you're right, there is no poker at the Mirage. But I wanted to come see the property before they tear it down and put up the Hard Rock. And also, I had to run an errand for a friend and pick up a few chips. So we got that done. And I've been in the property a little bit here. And it's cool. Sorry to see it go, but I'm now heading over to Bellagio, and we're gonna jump into a 2-5 game. So that's what's on the agenda for today, Wednesday, July the 10th. And you gotta kind of admit this is pretty cool. No other resort is quite like it on the Strip. So sorry to see it get torn down. Go ahead. People are thinking I'm recording this way and I'm recording this way, so it's not really that big of a deal. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool area. No place quite like it, so sorry to see it get torn down. No better way to start a session than by picking up the pocket aces, and better yet, we are in late position, so we should end up having position on all of our opponents in this hand, which just makes it all the more fun. There's one player in the low jack who limped into the pot, so I raise it up and I make it 20 to go. Cutoff and button both fold, but the small blind decides to put in the call. Big blind folds, and the player who limped in the low jack decides to go ahead and fold as well. So we're going to end up going heads up here to a flop. And a wet dynamic flop is what we get when we see the queen of diamonds, jack of diamonds, 7 of clubs. Small blind starts things off with a check, which I would expect her to do pretty much 100% of the time, and I'm going to fire out a range bet here because I think this board could definitely hit my pre-flop raising range. So I make it 25 to go, and the small blind thinks for a while and looks back at her cards, giving me a little bit of a live tell here that she might be looking at her cards because she's on some type of a draw, but she could also have a jack X hand or something of that nature. So when she puts in the call and we head off to a turn and we see the queen of clubs pairing the top pair on the board, it's not my favorite card in the deck as it's going to hit the small blind's calling range pretty hard. Small blind checks, and as usual I end up making a mistake here right out of the gate and I check back. I think the right play here on the turn is to continue with a small bet. We can still get value from small blind's draws, which there are a lot of. Plus she can also still get sticky with a lot of her jack X hands, and she might have some pocket pairs that are non-believing here as well on the turn that might call a small bet. So I think a small bet on the turn is the right way to go. After checking the turn, we see the jack of hearts on the river, which double pairs the board. The front door flush missed, but on a double paired board, I'm not sure we beat much here. The best we could hope for is that small blind has some sort of missed flush draw or straight draw. I make a pretty quick decision to just fold after the small blind starts to assemble a bet of around $60 on the river. Might be a bit too tight as we did give her some rope by checking back turn, but most opponents aren't bluffing rivers too often. And I don't think this is a spot that she's going to be bluffing at a high frequency, so unfortunately our pocket aces go down in flames to start the session. Next hand we pick up is Queen 8 of hearts, and we are in the hijack. This is going to be one of the weakest suited queens that I'm raising from this position. It ends up folding to me, and I go ahead and bump it up to 15. The cutoff folds, the button folds, small blind folds, and our friend from the last hand is in the big blind, and she goes ahead and puts in the call. Heads up in position once again to a flop of jack 6 deuce rainbow. I had noticed while watching this opponent play previous hands against other players that she calls flop a lot and folds turn a lot. So I'm keeping that in mind when she checks to me, and I go ahead and fire a continuation bet here of $20. And as suspected, after thinking about it for just a little bit and confirming with the dealer that it is a $20 bet, she does go ahead and put in the call. So we're going to continue on to a turn card. Let's see what the turn has got in store for us. The turn is the deuce of diamonds, pairing the low card on the board, and once again I make a blunder here. I think I should be betting small here to continue getting the big blind to call with some of her weaker top pairs and some of her non-believing pocket pairs like 8s, 7s, 9s, etc. So when the small blind checks and I decide to blast off here for $80, she pretty much snap folds in this spot before I can even get the chips over the betting line. And I think we probably could have gotten a call from some of her weaker pairs had we bet small and then gotten her to fold river, thereby getting a little bit more value with our bluff. And in this next one, we pick up ace-9 of spades under the gun, and this might be a little too loose. We raise it up to 15. I think 100 big blind effective. This might be a fold. I think ace-10 suited or ace-jack suited might be the worst suited ace we want to be raising in early position when we're on the shallow side here. But anyway, we end up getting two players who decide to tag along. Middle position and the low jack both put in the call, and we're going to go multi-way to a flop, which is 9-8-3 rainbow. I'm out of position here, so I'm going to start things off with a check like I would with my entire range, and middle position 1 checks and low jack checks. So we are going to go to a turn card, which peels off the ace of diamonds. Now we have top 2 pair, and the backdoor flush draw is out there as well. So I think we want to start building a pot here, so I go ahead and fire out for 30. Player in middle position quickly calls 30, and the player in the low jack is going to get out of the way. He ends up folding, and we're going to go heads up to the river. Here is the jack of spades, completing the most obvious straight draw. Queen 10 got there. However, the front door flush missed. So I think I want to bet for thin value here, but I end up checking, and I'm hoping that the middle position player might bluff his missed flush draws, but unfortunately he doesn't. He just quickly checks back, and our top 2 pair is good, and we end up taking down this pot. We are under the gun again this time, but we have a pair. Pocket 7s definitely deserves a raise, so I bring it in for 15. Folds around to the button, who ends up calling 15, and both blinds end up folding, so we're going to go heads up here to a flop. And the flop, well, the flop is a good one for us. I'd say it's above average when you have pocket 7s. We see the queen of clubs, 7 of clubs, queen of spades. Pretty wet board here. Out of position, I start things off with a check and see what the button wants to do, and unfortunately he quickly checks it back. Turn is the 6 of spades, and after the button checks on the flop, I think we have to start betting ourselves here and building a pot. So I fire out for 20. He doesn't think too long before deciding $20 is a good price, and he goes ahead and flicks in the call, so we're going to continue on to a river. Here is the 9 of spades, which does bring in the backdoor flush draw, but I don't think I can be too worried about monsters under the bed here. I think I definitely want to be betting for value. I decide to go with the size of $45, and he pretty quickly calls here, which makes me think I could have probably gotten a lot more. I announce set, he says, damn it, and flashes a king, so I definitely think we might have missed some value here in this hand. Pocket aces let us down earlier in this session. Let's see if we can get a little redemption with them this time around. We are under the gun, and I go ahead and make it my standard 3x open to $15. Folds to the button, who puts in the call. Small blind calls as well, so we're going to end up going 3 ways here to a flop. 3 ways to a flop of jack 5 deuce with 2 diamonds. Small blind goes ahead and starts off with a check over to me, and I think multi-way with a decent value hand here, I can fire a continuation bet a little bit on the smaller side. I make it 25 to go. Button puts in the $25 call, and the small blind folds. The button started this hand with around 300 effective, so when he calls flop, I think his range consists mostly of 3 buckets. He's got flush draws, he's got top pair hands, and he's got some hidden value hands or monsters that he's slow played. The turn is the 9 of hearts, which really shouldn't change too much unless he got sticky with a hand like pocket 9s on the flop. I go ahead and announce a bet of 60, and he thinks about it for a little while here before deciding that 60 is not going to be enough. He decides to go ahead and move all in for 160 more. Now I'm not loving this spot. People always like to take this type of a line when they have a very strong hand on the flop and they feel invulnerable, and then they jam turn. But I think we're too strong to fold here for such a small amount. Villain could be overvaluing a lot of Jack X hands like Ace Jack, King Jack, Queen Jack, or even Jack 10. So I go ahead and put in the call. He does announce right away I have a set, so we're drawing pretty slim here. We see the 3 of clubs on the river, which is no help to us. Pocket aces let us down again, unfortunately, and we end up losing this pot to his set of 5s. I guess what all of you think if we could have made an exploitative fold here on the turn. When players take this line, I think they almost always show up with a set or maybe a turn top 2 pair or something like that. I think we could have laid it down, but I'm curious to know if you think if that might be a little bit too tight. Admittedly, I'm a little tilted after losing with aces in that last hand, and I pretty quickly pick up queen jack offsuit on the button. There's one player in early position who limped into the pot, so when it folds around to me, I raise it up to 20. Small blind puts in the call, and the player who limped in gets out of the way, so we're going to go heads up in position to a flop. The flop comes down jack 9-7 rainbow. Small blind starts things off here with a check, and in position with top pair and a decent kicker, I'm going to fire out a continuation bet here. I make it 25 to go. Small blind really doesn't think too long at all before putting in the $25 call, so we're going to continue on here to a turn card. Heads up, let's see what the turn has for us. It's the 4 of hearts. Now the 4 of hearts should be a total brick on this board, so when small blind checks again, I think I should be going for a small bet here, but instead I end up checking it back, and we go to a river, which is the deuce of diamonds. Now the small blind decides he's going to take over the lead here and bet, and he makes it 50 to go, and I just snap call this with our top pair. If he has me beat, he's just going to have to show me, and of course he does have me beat. He shows king jack offsuit for a better top pair with a better kicker. Premium pocket pairs haven't worked out for us in this session, so let's see if we can get the smallest of pocket pairs to do a little bit better. We've got the ducks on the button. We see a fold around to the low jack who raises it to 15. Hijack folds, cutoff folds, action's on me. I go ahead and call, and both blinds get out of the way. So we're going to go heads up to a flop, which is way above average, I would say. It's deuce, deuce, 9 rainbow. The low jack ends up c-betting 15, and I call 15 because, I mean, I've got quads, so what else do you do here with quads? Turn is the king of hearts, and now the low jack slows down and checks. Even though we have 4 of a kind here, I definitely think we want to keep building a pot, so I go ahead and fire out for 25. The low jack thinks for just a little bit here before deciding that 25 seems like a pretty reasonable price, and he puts in 1 green chip for a call. River is a meaningless 3 of clubs. He checks again, and I decide to go for a larger sizing here to try to get as much value as I can out of my deuces. I put in 1 black chip and announce a bet of $100. Really trying to make this look a little bit bluffy, like I'm trying to steal the pot. He doesn't look too happy with this bet size, but he doesn't think too long before flicking in a $100 chip for a call. I announce that we've got quads, and he ends up chuckling and says, shit. And we end up taking down a nice pot here with our ducks. The fact that he called so quickly on the river makes me think we could have extracted even more value out of him. This is something I've been thinking about a lot in these types of spots. If I could get 100, would he call 125? Would he call 140? Would he call 150? So I'm just really trying to think ways where I can extract max value when I have value hands like quads. Got a couple new players at the table, and the pre-flop action was starting to get a little bit wild. A little bit of a different vibe than what you would see at like a 1-3 table, for example. It folds around to me in late position, and I've got 6-5 of hearts. Definitely a hand worth a raise, so I bump it up to 15. The button gets out of the way. The small blind decides to go ahead and put in the 3-bet to 45. Now the action is over to the big blind, who pauses and looks at his cards, and he's got that look in his eye. And I can already sense that a 4-bet is incoming, and that is exactly what happens here. He slides out a $115 4-bet, and I'm not liking this spot at all. I think I'm going to leave this party, and I quickly fold. Last hand of the session, and it's a big one. We end up looking down at the ladies in the big blind. It ends up folding around to the player on the button, who has been pretty tight, pretty straightforward this session, and he raises it up to 15. He's going to have a pretty wide range, though, on the button, so when the small blind decides to call 15, you know I'm not going to be calling here. I go ahead and announce a 3-bet, and I raise it up to $70. The button doesn't think too long before just letting his cards go, and it's back over to the small blind. The small blind, he does not do the same. He goes ahead and decides he's going to put in a call here. So we're going to go heads up to a flop in position in a 3-bet pot. We've got a little bit of a monster brewing here. About 155 in the middle, we go to the flop, which comes down jack of clubs, 3 of diamonds, 7 of diamonds. Small blind checks, and I think about his range here and what I'm targeting. I think he can have some jack X hands. I think he can have some flush draws. So I think I want to target those hands here and bet maybe around 35-40% pot. That's what I end up doing. I announce a bet of $60 and I throw in one black chip. The small blind doesn't think at all about this. He just pretty much snap calls this bet, which leads me to believe that he's way more weighted towards draws here. Now my plan on the turn was to continue betting and continue betting large here on the turn. The turn is the king of clubs, and now this is where this hand gets interesting. The small blind decides he's going to donk bet here, and he donk bets pretty quickly to $115. My immediate thought here was just to fold, but after thinking about it a bit more, what king-x hands does small blind have that play this way? King-jack would probably check and flow, and I think king-queen would probably more than likely do the same. I don't think he's going to have ace-king here. I think he would have 4-bet ace-king pre-flop, so I don't think there's a ton of ace-king in his range. And after ruling out king-x hands, I think his range is primarily weighted towards draws, flush draws, and maybe he turned a straight draw, and he's trying to put pressure on my hand, hands like pocket aces, pocket queens, and pocket jacks. So I think if we're confident that he's weighted mostly towards draws here, and that makes up a majority of his range in this spot, I think the play is just to jam here. I take some additional time to think things over, and the more I think about it, the more I just think I'm going to be ahead in this spot. I think we're going to be a 3-1 favorite against almost all of his draws here, so I think we just have to go with it. This may seem like a punt, and it might be a punt. If he shows up with a king here, we're just pretty much toast. But I have to go with my read, and I do go with my read. I eventually announce all in. He looks disgusted, but he throws in a chip and puts in the call. And we go to a river, which is the 10 of spades. He announces he hit a straight, turns over the 9-8 of clubs, and our read was spot on. And I show the queens, and we can't hold here, unfortunately. Pocket pairs have just not been kind to us this session, especially premium pocket pairs. After this hand, I decide to call it a night. Well, that sucked. We played for 3 hours and 4 minutes, and we got wrecked. I needed my queens to hold, and they didn't hold. I had the right read on the player. I had a pretty good feeling. I knew exactly where I was at, and I was right. He was on a draw, and I blocked the straight draw. I had a club in my hand, so I blocked the club draw, and I just felt it was the right spot. But he still hit the straight on the river. So we get unlucky and lose a big pot to end the night. We were in the game for $750 and we cashed out for $0. Big goose egg. So not a great night at the poker table. We did hit some big hands, but unfortunately when we needed to hold, we just couldn't hold. So I felt like I still played well. I had the right reads. I made the right moves in the right spots, maybe except for calling with pocket aces there, although I don't really think that's too big of a mistake given that he was pretty short stacked. So we didn't, yeah, I mean, if he's got a set there, he's got a set there. What are you going to do? So July has started off a little bit rough. Just to give you guys kind of an update, May and June were both profitable months. And so far, I've started off down in July. So let's see if we could turn it around. We've got plenty of July left to see if we could turn it around. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do all the YouTube stuff up here. And I will see you in episode 54. Take care.